Hi, I'm Barry from Podhome. Let's talk about podcast distribution and what that is and how that works in Podhome. So, let's say you create a podcast. That's great. I love listening to podcasts. Now, how do you get that into the hands of listeners? Well, you upload it to a host, for instance, Podhome, and there are lots of other hosts as well. So you upload your media file to us, and we take that and we enhance that, make the audio quality better, create things like chapters, transcripts, titles, show notes, clips, and more. And then we create a XML file from all of that data, which is called an RSS feed. And that contains all of the information about your show and your episodes, including links to the actual media files, so your MP3 files. Those are then ingested by directories, so podcast directories like Apple Podcasts, Podcast Index, Amazon Music, Spotify has its own thing, YouTube has its own thing, and there are a couple more. These directories are very important because this is what podcast player apps use. So a lot of podcast player apps use Apple Podcasts as their directory, and they get all of their shows from there. So when you search on a player app, they search in Apple Podcasts, and then you can play your episodes from there. Other player apps look in different podcast directories, like the open source Podcast Index, for instance, or Amazon Music, or Spotify, or something else. Now, as a podcaster, your goal is probably to get your episodes into the hands of as many listeners as you can. And that means that you probably have to get your episodes and your show into as many podcast directories as you can. Now, Podhome can help with that. Here we are in the Podhome application. And here we can go to the Distribution tab. Now, in this Distribution tab, you will find a link to your RSS feed. That is an XML document that contains all of the information about your podcast. Now, we render it nicely. You can also just take a look at it. And there you can see all of the lovely information about your podcast, including links to things like transcripts, chapters, people, and of course your media as well. Now, in the distribution page, you can configure which directories see your show and ingest it. So here I have already configured Apple Podcasts. So let's say that I am new and that I want to submit my show to Apple Podcasts. I can do that right from here with this button here. This opens the Apple Podcast Connect page, and here I need to log into my account. So you need to have an Apple ID, which is an Apple account, in order to submit your podcast to Apple Podcasts. Now, once I've authenticated, I will see this screen right here to add an RSS feed. And we've pre-filled this with your new RSS feed from Podhome. Now, I'm not going to do that because this show is already here, but you can see how easily that works. And after submitting this, it will usually take just a couple of minutes before this thing is actually added to Apple Podcasts, but it could be that it takes days as they might review your show. In any case, we will send you an email once Apple Podcasts has submitted your show to their directory successfully and let you know. And once that happens, we also fill in the URLs of apps that pull from the Apple Podcast directory, which are, for instance, Castbox, Pocket Casts, Overcasts, and Castro. You can also claim or add your show manually there through links that we provide here. You can also add your show to other directories and databases, like the Podcast Index, for instance, Spotify for Podcasters, Amazon Music, Angami, Radio Republic, Podcast Addict, Deezer, Player FM, Good Pods, Podchaser, and Listen Notes. Some of these are apps, some of these are directories, and some just need you to claim the podcast that is already there. Now, we try to make this as easy as possible for you. So, for instance, for the Podcast Index, we add your show in there automatically and also send you an email that has been the case. Now, This makes sure that your show is in all of these directories. So why do we show here also player apps? Because those are not directories. Well, that's because once we have those URLs, we can show badges of these player apps on your Podhome website. Here, for instance, is the Podhome website for Developer Weekly, and that means that we can then show, listen in your favorite app, all of the lovely apps and directories that we know about that your podcast is on. Okay, lovely. So for more of these features, go to podhome.fm, create your own account to get started. See you there.